500 meters underground, at the end of a shift, the mine forgets the sky exists. Dust hangs in the black air. It scrapes the miner's throat every time he tries to breathe. His hand closes around the worn pickaxe handle, not because it can move the mountain above him, but because it is the only solid thing left when the world has folded in. This is where a man learns what fear really wants. Fear does not always scream. Sometimes it counts every breath. Sometimes it looks at the men beside you and whispers that their air is your enemy. Despair makes the dark feel final. Oxygen greed makes survival feel like betrayal. So what remains of discipline when panic has a reason? This is not a story about escaping pressure. It is about learning how to stand correctly inside it. The miner does not become afraid because he is weak. He becomes afraid because the situation is honest. 500 meters underground, there is no room for fantasy. The ceiling has come down. The tunnel that carried men in at the start of the shift has become a wall of broken rock, bent steel, and dust so thick it feels like something alive. The lamps cut small circles into the dark, but the darkness around those circles does not move. It waits. The miner sits with his back against the rib of the tunnel, one hand wrapped around the pickaxe handle. The wood is rubbed smooth from years of palms, sweat, pressure, and repetition. All day, that handle meant work. It meant force. It meant progress measured in chips, strikes, and cleared ground. Now it means something else. Now it is a reminder that his hand is still his hand. That matters more than it sounds. Because in a collapse, the first thing a man loses is not oxygen. It is command. His breathing shortens before he decides to shorten it. His jaw locks. His eyes keep returning to the blocked passage as if staring harder might reopen it. Every sound becomes a message. A pebble sliding somewhere in the dark. A cough. A boot scraping gravel. The faint metallic tick of cooling equipment. The heavy silence after everyone stops talking at once. Then the dust reaches his throat again. It scrapes on the way in. It burns on the way out. Every breath feels expensive. And when breath becomes expensive, character gets tested. Not the version of character people talk about when life is comfortable. Not the clean version spoken about in meetings, ceremonies, motivational speeches, or locker rooms. This is the rougher version. The version that appears when the body starts bargaining with the mind. Save yourself. Use less. Move away from them. Do not share. Do not wait. Do not trust. That is the shadow in the tunnel, despair and oxygen greed. Despair says the mountain has already decided. Oxygen greed says the only moral law left is the next breath. Together, they try to shrink a human being into an animal with a watch, a helmet, and a pulse. And nobody should pretend that temptation is small. A miner knows the earth. He knows weight. He knows how quickly confidence can turn into math. How many men? How much air? How long before rescue even knows where to dig? How many times can the chest rise before the body begins to pay for every wasted movement? High-stakes pressure has a cruel talent. It makes every decision feel final before you have enough information to make it cleanly. It turns uncertainty into accusation. It makes another man's breathing sound like theft. It makes a cough feel like betrayal. It makes waiting feel like surrender. This is where many people misunderstand calm. Calm is not pretending the danger is not real. That kind of calm is just theater. It is a mask worn by people who have not yet met the full weight of consequence. Fudoshin is different. Fudoshin does not remove fear from the tunnel. It places fear under command. The miner still feels the pressure in his chest. He still tastes dust on his tongue. He still knows the air is limited. He still knows that rescue, if it comes, will come from the other side of rock he cannot move with hope alone. Discipline does not ask him to deny any of that. It asks him not to let the worst part of him become the leader. Look closely at the body in a moment like this. A man without command burns air trying to escape the feeling of being trapped. He talks too fast. He shifts positions again and again. He argues over things no one can prove yet. He grabs at tools, not because there is a plan, but because movement feels better than helplessness. He lets panic spend the very resource panic is afraid to lose. That is the hidden violence of fear. It does not always break the body from the outside. Sometimes it wastes the body from the inside. The disciplined miner has no magic. His heart still pounds. His mouth still dries. He may still want to shout. He may still feel a flash of anger at the men beside him for needing the same air he needs. But between the feeling and the action, he creates one narrow space. In that space, command returns. He does not worship his fear. He does not attack it either. He reads it like a gauge. Fast breath means slow the body. Tight grip means soften the fingers. Racing thoughts mean shrink the next decision. The dark says forever, so he answers with the next 10 seconds. This is the battlefield of P1, high stakes, breath, decision, sequence, clarity under pressure. Not glory. Not drama. Sequence. Who is hurt? Who can speak? Where is the safest pocket of air? What movement is necessary, and what movement is waste? Who is panicking, and who needs a voice low enough to follow? What sound should be saved for signaling, and what sound is only fear trying to become noise? The miner's hand tightens around the pickaxe handle. At first, it is instinct. A grip against helplessness. A man holding wood because the world has become stone. But even instinct can be trained into order. The handle becomes a line between panic and action. He feels the grain under his palm. He feels the dust collected in the cracks. He notices the pressure of his thumb. He notices that his hand is squeezing harder than it needs to. So he loosens it by a fraction. That fraction matters. A man who can loosen his grip by a fraction can still give an order to himself. And a man who can give an order to himself is not yet owned by the dark. Around him, the collapse keeps doing what collapses do. It offers no comfort. The tunnel does not apologize. The air does not multiply because men are frightened. The rock does not care who has a family, who is almost done with his shift, who planned to drive home tired and eat dinner standing at the kitchen counter. Pressure does not become fair because the stakes are high. So discipline must become precise. The undisciplined reaction says, I need to survive, even if I become smaller to do it. The disciplined response says, I need to survive without handing command to despair. There is a difference. One turns other people into threats. The other keeps them as men. One spends breath proving fear is real. The other uses breath to keep the mind usable. One stares at the blocked tunnel and calls it fate. The other studies the same wall and asks what can still be done without wasting what remains. That is not softness. That is not sentiment. Under the earth, human dignity becomes practical. Panic consumes oxygen. Blame consumes attention. Greed fractures the group. Despair stops the mind from seeing openings that may still exist. In a mind collapse, discipline is not decoration. It is survival with a spine. The miner does not need to feel brave. Brave is too large a word for that much dust. He needs to be useful. Useful to his own lungs. Useful to the men beside him. Useful to the small sequence of decisions between this breath and the next. So he lowers his head. Not in defeat. In command. He listens past the pounding in his ears. He feels the pickaxe handle in his palm. He lets the dust scrape his throat without letting that scrape become his whole mind. The darkness remains. The air remains limited. The end of the shift has turned into a test no man asked for. But the deepest collapse is not always rock. Sometimes it is the moment a person lets fear take the throne. And in that narrow chamber, 500 meters underground, the miner begins to understand. The mountain above him is heavy, but panic is heavier when it is allowed to rule. Discipline does not begin after you feel calm. It begins in the first second you realize you are about to lose command. For the miner, that second arrives with dust in his throat and darkness pressing against his helmet light. His chest wants speed. His mind wants answers. His fear wants to run in 6 directions, even though there is nowhere to run. That is how panic lies. It convinces the body that motion is the same as survival. So the first practice is not heroic. He stops. Not forever. Not in surrender. Just long enough to catch the first wild command before it leaves his body as wasted movement, wasted shouting, wasted breath. He feels the urge to curse at the rock, to shake the blocked passage, to ask the same impossible question again and again. Instead, he says it silently. Fear is here. Then he adds the second line. Fear is not in command. That small sentence does not open the mind. It opens 1 inch of space inside the man. The second practice is the pickaxe handle. His fist is locked around it so tightly that his knuckles ache. At first, he does not notice. Panic hides in the hand before it reaches the mouth. So he studies his grip. Thumb. Palm. Fingers. Wood grain. Dust packed into the worn lines of the handle. He loosens his hand by 1 degree. Then another. He does not drop the tool. He does not pretend the tool can solve everything. He uses it as proof that his body can still obey him. The handle is no longer just a piece of work equipment. It is a rail back to the present. The third practice is posture. He sets both boots against the floor of the tunnel. He lets his back find the wall without collapsing into it. He lowers his shoulders. He keeps his headlamp still. In a place where the ceiling has already fallen, even the way a man holds his body becomes a message to the men beside him. If he folds, fear spreads. If he steadies, steadiness has somewhere to begin. The fourth practice is the voice. Not loud. Loud belongs to panic unless there is a clear reason for it. His voice drops low enough for the nearest man to hear. Stay still. Save your strength. One thing at a time. He does not say it like a speech. He says it like a working man naming the next task. The words are plain because the tunnel has no use for poetry. In high stakes, language must become clean. No drama. No blame. No guesses dressed up as truth. One thing at a time. That sentence becomes a beam inside the dark. The fifth practice is to shrink the battle. The mind wants the whole future at once. It wants rescue time, air count, family, blame, regret, the sound of machinery that is not yet there. It wants to drag tomorrow into a tunnel that can barely hold the next minute. The miner refuses the whole future. He chooses the next right action. Check who is conscious. Listen. Keep unnecessary movement down. Keep the group from turning on itself. Use the training they already know. Wait for signs without inventing them. Answer the man who is starting to spiral before his fear becomes everyone's fear. None of this feels impressive. That is why it matters. Real discipline often looks small from the outside. A quieter breath. A hand opening. A voice lowering. A body becoming useful again. A man choosing not to steal peace from the room just because his own peace is gone. The sixth practice is to name the shadow without obeying it. Oxygen greed does not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as logic with dirty hands. It says, you have people waiting for you. You have more to lose. You worked harder. You deserve the air. Move away. Think only of yourself. The miner hears it. He does not act like he is above it. That would be another kind of weakness. A disciplined man does not become clean by denying the mud. He becomes trustworthy by knowing exactly what the mud is trying to do. So he looks at the men beside him and forces his mind to keep them human. Not obstacles. Not numbers. Not mouths taking from him. Men. Dust on their faces. Lamps trembling. A cough swallowed too quickly. Someone whispering a name under his breath. Someone trying not to sound afraid and failing. The shadow loses strength when it cannot turn people into objects. The seventh practice is ritual. A ritual does not need candles or ceremony. In a collapsed mind, ritual is repetition under command. Feel the handle. Loosen the grip. Set the boots. Lower the breath. Choose the next action. Return. Again. Dust scrapes the throat. Return. A rock ticks somewhere in the black. Return. A man asks if they are going to make it. Return. The miner does not answer with fake certainty. False hope is just panic wearing clean clothes. He says what can be said with honor. We stay steady. We do the next thing right. That is enough. Not because it guarantees rescue. Nothing in that tunnel can guarantee rescue. But because it keeps despair from becoming the foreman of the trapped. This is Shugyo inside Fudoshin, pressure made into training, not by choosing danger, but by refusing to let danger choose your character for you. The miner's world has become brutally small. A wall of rock. A pocket of air. A few men. A handle in the hand. Dust against the throat. The end of a shift that did not end. But inside that small world, command can still be practiced. He cannot lift the mountain. He can stop wasting himself against it. He cannot make fear disappear. He can keep fear out of the captain's chair. He cannot create more sky. He can make sure the darkness does not turn him against the men breathing beside him. So he returns to the handle again. At the beginning, he gripped it because he was trapped. Now he grips it differently because he is training. Not training for applause. Not training for a camera. Training in the oldest, plainest sense, to remain human when fear has a reasonable argument. The tunnel does not become safe because the miner becomes steady. That is the first honest thing. The rock still blocks the passage. The air is still limited. The dust still moves through the dark and slow, dirty clouds whenever someone shifts too quickly. 500 meters underground, no thought is powerful enough to lift stone. No lesson is deep enough to replace oxygen. No discipline worth trusting asks a man to pretend otherwise. But something changes. Not outside first. Inside. The miner's helmet light no longer darts across the collapsed wall like an animal looking for a crack. It settles. It moves when there is a reason to move. His breathing is still careful, but it is no longer frantic. His hand remains on the pickaxe handle, yet the grip has changed from panic to contact. Earlier, he held it like a drowning man holds anything that floats. Now he holds it like a craftsman holds a tool he respects. The difference is quiet. The difference is everything. The men around him can feel it before they understand it. Fear is contagious, but so is command. One man stops shifting his boots. Another lowers his voice. Someone who had been whispering too fast begins to listen. The tunnel has not given them mercy, but it has stopped receiving their panic as payment. The miner wipes dust from the handle with his thumb. A useless gesture, maybe. Except it is not useless. It is ritual. It is a small act of order inside a place that has lost its shape. It tells his body, we are still here. We still choose. We still belong to ourselves. At the beginning, the pickaxe handle was proof of work interrupted. In the middle, it became an anchor against panic. Now it becomes a standard. Not a flag. Not a symbol for anyone else to admire. A private standard. A line he will not fall beneath while he still has breath enough to choose. He looks at the blocked passage again. The same wall is there. But it no longer speaks with the voice of final judgment. That is the transformation. The disciplined mind does not need the facts to become gentle. It needs the facts to become clear. A collapsed mind is not gentle. Limited oxygen is not gentle. Dust scraping the throat is not gentle. But clarity can live in hard places. Clarity says, do not spend air on panic. Clarity says, do not turn men into enemies because fear is running out of manners. Clarity says, do not confuse despair with truth just because despair has a deeper voice. A miner understands pressure better than most people. He has heard the earth groan. He has felt machinery shake through his boots. He has worked in spaces where daylight is memory and every safe return is built from procedure, attention, and respect for what can kill you. But this pressure is different. This pressure is not only above him. It is inside him. It presses on his judgment. It presses on his loyalty. It presses on the thin border between survival and selfishness. The old version of him wanted certainty before he acted with honor. The steadier version learns something harsher. Sometimes honor has to arrive before certainty. So he does not promise rescue. He does not promise that everything will be fine. He promises behavior. We keep still unless we need to move. He says it low. We listen. A pause. We don't waste air fighting each other. That is not a movie speech. It is better than that. It is usable. It gives the men something to stand on when there is no ground left in the mind. Outside, somewhere beyond the collapsed section, there may be crews, maps, radios, drills, supervisors counting minutes with tight faces under harsh lights. But inside the pocket, the miner cannot live in the fantasy of rescue every second. If he stares only toward what he cannot control, the dark will eat what little command he has rebuilt. So he returns to what is near. The handle. The breath. The men. The next sound. The next decision. The next refusal to let fear become law. This is modern samurai discipline with no armor, no battlefield, no ancient ceremony. Just a man under the earth at shift end, with dust in his throat and pressure testing the shape of his soul. It is not coldness. Coldness would abandon the others and call it strength. It is not denial. Denial would smile at danger and waste the truth. It is not blind toughness. Blind toughness would fight the mountain until the body had nothing left. This is command. Calm command. The kind that keeps emotion in the room but does not let emotion drive the machine. The kind that can feel terror and still choose sequence. The kind that can hear despair speak and still refuse to hand it the final word. The miner closes his eyes for one breath. Only one. Not to escape the dark, but to stop feeding it. When he opens them, the tunnel looks the same. Broken. Narrow. Dust thick. Unforgiving. But he is not the same man who first grabbed the pickaxe handle when the ceiling came down. That man wanted the dark to end before he could be decent. This man understands that decency may be the thing that keeps the dark from becoming total. He shifts the handle across his knees and taps it once against the stone floor. Not loud. Just enough. A signal to himself. A signal to the men. We are still under command. Maybe rescue hears them later. Maybe the first distant sound of drilling comes through the rock like thunder from another world. Maybe it does not come yet. The transformation does not depend on making the ending easy. It depends on the miner becoming trustworthy before the ending is known. That is where Fudoshin lives. Not in a quiet room. Not after the danger passes. Not when the air is clean and the lights are warm and everyone has the luxury of acting wise. It lives in the moment when the throat burns, the mind bargains, the body wants to spend itself, and the hand still chooses to loosen its grip. The mountain remains heavy. But fear is no longer king. Most people will never be trapped 500 meters underground. But everyone has a place where the air feels limited. An office where one mistake could follow you for years. A kitchen at midnight when the bills are open on the table. A hospital chair. A quiet car after bad news. A room where fear starts counting what is left and calls it wisdom. Your mind may not have rock walls. But it has pressure. And when pressure comes, the test is not whether fear appears. Fear will appear. Despair may speak. The greedy part of the mind may tell you to protect yourself at any cost. That is when you reach for your own pickaxe handle. A breath. A posture. A word kept clean. One next action. Stand there. If this lesson belongs in your life, carry it quietly. A disciplined person is not someone who never feels fear. It is someone who refuses to let fear take command.